The Houston Cougars fall to Oklahoma State in what's kind of feeling like an indescribable fashion. We're going to try and do that and a whole bunch of other stuff we've never really done before here at Locked On Coogs, Cougars After Dark. Let's jump on into it.
You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Cougs, daily podcast about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach Parker Ainsworth, here to break down all things Cougs. If you're a U of H fan or just a hater who can stop by, and on a night like tonight, there might be a few of you, be sure to subscribe down below. That way you get latest on the Cougs in your newsfeed each and every day. Appreciate you making Locked On Cougs your first listen of the day, or tonight on Cougars After Dark Live, perhaps your final listen of the evening. Obviously, we're doing a giveaway over 250. We're getting close to 1750. So hit subscribe, help us get there. Like, comment on the video. If you can't think of what to say after this, tell us what's the biggest shouting match? This might be story time. What's the biggest shouting match you've ever gotten into? Now, we're going to talk about what we're doing tonight because we're doing something a little bit different. We're going to kind of split this up into two episodes, almost lumped into one. And then on the back half, I'll cut them and put them in different feeds as responsible for the Cougars After Dark folks or the people listening to this in the regular podcast feed. This is a bonus episode every Saturday night, right? But we'll be doing one long episode talking about the football game first and moving forward that program, and then the basketball thing second because happy things come second, and moving forward with that program. So if it feels a little jumpy here at the start or end, because you're listening to it after the fact, I'm sorry, but that's the way that goes. Let's jump on in and talk some about the basketball program, because the basketball program is doing particularly well, I'd say, particularly well. Now, for those who have not paid attention, Houston did move up to number 6 in the AP poll this week, and they took that number 6 ranking on the road with them to Charleston to play in the Charleston Classic. Now, Charleston Classic is interesting in that it's got a bunch of, it's got some good mid-major basketball teams in it. Obviously, we're going to talk some about Dayton in a second. But in the Charleston Basketball Classic, Children's Charleston Basketball Classic. That's way too hard for me to say. I don't know why. You had Houston beat Towson in the opening round. We talked about that ad nauseum the other day. St. John's beat North Texas on the other side of the bracket. That's St. John's, led by one Rick Pitino, beat North Texas by a whopping 1 point. So shouts to North Texas on that one. You then had Dayton beat LSU, the same SEC LSU that's actually got some good transfers in right now. Dayton beat them by 3 whole points. And then there was one more later that night. That was Utah and Wake Forest. Houston obviously played Utah again on Friday. Now, at the end of the episode, I'll talk more about some stuff going on. But Friday, as teacher and coach, I coach basketball. We had a game. And so in driving out to the middle of nowhere to play that game, playing the game and coming back, I ended up watching the game at like 11 o'clock until almost 1 o'clock when I was done watching it on Friday night and Saturday morning. And so I want to talk a little bit about that one here because, frankly, I do feel like that one's worth breaking down some. Houston went into the Utah game. People were really, really worried about it. People were really, really worried for a number of reasons about the size that Utah proposed. I mean, Utah started 2 7-footers, and they started a 6'6" and a 6'7" with those 2 7-footers, and their point guard was 6'4". And what is Houston going to do? And the truth is that Houston did fine, right? By my box score here, Houston had 39 total rebounds. By my box score here, Utah had 35 total rebounds. So Houston out-rebounded this team of giants from Utah, right? The giants from the mountains came down, and Houston beat them up on the boards. If anything, the thing that kept Utah in the game as competitive as it was, before we get into like the ins and outs of the basketball game, was their own shooting. Obviously, being able to shoot over the top helps a whole heck of a lot. But Gabe Madsen, their point guard, the 6'4" guy, he went 8 of 15 from the three-point line. 8 of 15. He shot 15 threes in a college basketball game. I played 37 minutes, but he shot 15 threes. Houston was somewhat reprieved to see Brandon Carlson only go 2 for 8. He went 4 for 7 against Wake Forest the night before. And so obviously that was nice to see him get cool off a little bit. And those are the only two guys that made a three. So obviously carried a lot by Gabe Madsen in this one. Outside of those two guys, they did not have a single guy in double figures. It's a big step up, or speaks very loudly, I should say, to the Houston Cougar defense. I don't know if people were paying attention to the Houston Cougar defense, but they did exactly what I told you they would do. So if you listen to Locked on Cougs on Friday morning, you're like, what's Houston going to do against Utah? You heard me talk about it. And then they did it. And I feel really, really vindicated in doing that. I feel really, really good about doing that. Hope you made me laugh. I still cannot believe Kelvin is in the 70s. He looks great. If I am as into it, as put together, as on it, and frankly, as passionate about what I'm doing in my 70s as Kelvin Sampson is, I will be living right. I agree with that 100%. I agree with that 100%. So in this game, the defense, Kelvin run up transition, was they would put a great deal of ball pressure on the Utah guards as they crossed half court. They played a lengthy number of guards. They played Dunn. They played Arsenault. They did a lot of different stuff that were really, really interesting. And like they trapped from the weak side when they crossed half court. And then the way they rotated was they actually, like if you watch it back, and I admittedly have DVR, and that's how I got to watch the game. And so I could actually hit rewind a couple times. When they would trap up near half court, the guy that was open was standing like down by the basket, right? They trapped from so far away and then rotated where they would trap the guy and then rotate over and cut off the first pass. And frankly, from a sky shot view, they could have been giving up layups. Because of the ball pressure, because of the length, and because of how tightly covered those guys in those traps were, it made a difficult pass impossible, where all of a sudden you have to like lob the ball up with the guys in your face and ball pressure and flipping it up. And with the ball in the air and that ball pressure meant that was A, rotating defenders could move while the ball was in the air, as every good basketball coach will ever tell you needs to happen. And B, a lot of times, which led to a bunch of steals for Houston. Houston had 10 steals in this basketball game. And then Utah themselves had 15 turnovers, so 5 other turnovers. How those were created, that were that with the ball is in the air so long, Cougars could run under it, Cougars could tip it, Cougars could get deflections, and it frustrated Utah so much at various points of the ball game. It is an exhausting style of basketball to play. Absolutely exhausting. And on the second night of a back-to-back, what I think you saw happen in that like middle of the second half kind of portion was Houston kind of had to peel off it a little bit because they were running low on gas. I mean, as deep as Houston goes, that's that tiring level of basketball to play. They do that. Utah gets right back in it. They had a couple of threes on Madsen. He gets hot. He gets comfortable. Suddenly, we got a ball game, right? I thought it was interesting that, in sticking with this one, and this will be the last point before the break, I was interesting that Malik Wilson played so little. Malik Wilson's a guy I think is very valuable to this team. I think one of the things that hurt last year's team in March was Jamal Shead being worn out by the time it got to March. Malik Wilson's a great backup for him. He's long. They can play together when you need to. They can play, either one can play with LJ Cryer. Malik Wilson's a very fun backup point guard. But what's interesting is that in this game, when it was this kind of close and it was this kind of an opponent at this point in the year, it's November, we're still before Thanksgiving, folks. Kelvin Sampson very clearly said, I'm not going to go with the guy I hadn't seen play a whole lot yet. Jamal Shead, you got it. And Jamal Shead played 34 minutes, by far and away his most minutes of any game this year. He played 34 against Utah. He played 24 against Towson, 28 against Stetson, and he was in the teens against A&M Corpus, and Louisiana Monroe. So again, that's a lot more minutes on Jamal Shead, but it's a game you got to win against a good opponent. They knew they had Saturday off, and they got to play on Sunday evening, right? It's like a 7:30 Central Time game. Maybe at 7:30. I forget 7:30 Central East. You can add it, put this in the comments. And so, you got this big layoff after you get almost 48 full hours because the time of the game was on 3:30 on Friday, right? And so if you can push Jamal Shead for 34 minutes, you do it. Now, he also he also looked like a little winded and had 2 key turnovers at the later portion of the game that kind of kept this game closer than it needed to have, except you had one outstanding performance down the stretch. And so let's talk a little bit about outstanding performances, and that would be our buddies over at Athletic Brewing making game changers themselves. The game changer of this one is LJ Cryer, who had back-to-back threes from the corner in a very crucial moment of the game where it felt like Utah was coming back. Utah went zone. Utah tried to trap out of the zone. Houston was able to break the traps, find LJ in the corner, hit back-to-back threes. Now, Cryer led the way. Cryer led the Stars, I should say, with 14 points. So 6 of those 14 came with those crucial last few minutes of the basketball game where he knocked down his big threes and he changed the game. If you're trying to change the game, you get a non-alcoholic brew. You get an award-winning one with Athletic Brewing because they're fit for all times. You can do them all day long at wherever you're at. No hangovers after, no sluggishness after. You can go do whatever you want to after, and you can do all those things with a non-alcoholic, award-winning brew from Athletic Brewing. You go to athleticbrewing.com, use code LOCKEDON, LOCKEDON, and get 15% off your first order. That's LOCKEDON at checkout for 15% off your first order at athleticbrewing.com. Near beer, exclusions and conditions apply. Athletic Brewing, fit for all times. Now, I think it's interesting, and this is the thing I'm going to keep writing, I think, until something happens about it. They've got legitimately 9 guys, I think, that can play high-level Division I basketball. Kyle actually, that's funny timing, Kyle. Kyle says our rotation is too deep right now. Our guys can't get into a flow. The rotation has to be 8 guys by conference. I kind of think we're going to get there, and I don't know who's getting squeezed. We're currently playing about 9. I went 9 deep against Utah, and Ramon Walker did not play. We've seen Ramon Walker do important things for good basketball teams. And so I could see how he could work his way into a 9-man rotation. But I think you're right that generally speaking, we're playing 2 games a week. You need 8, right? That said, I'm not quite sure I know who's getting squeezed yet, but I think we can effectively say that starting Damian Dunn has not left him super comfortable. He was a backup for the majority of the year last year at Temple, and he was still first or second in points for nearly every one of their games while he was doing it. He would come in the first whistle of some games. I mean, it was just he wanted to get off the bench into the flow of the game. He came off the bench for the first 3 games for Houston and led Houston in points. Was second in Houston in points 2 of the 3. So he's been a starter in this Charleston Classic. He started against Towson. He had no points. He started against Utah. He had 7 points, and 5 of those 7 were in the second half when he was coming off the bench. I think we've got something here that's interesting in that he's actually more comfortable after he sits for a second and comes in the game somewhat fresh, right? And not some guys like, I can't come in the game stiff, right? Damian clearly is like, I can come in the game like and get loose quickly. I'd rather y'all have been running for a couple minutes and I'll catch up, right? Meanwhile, Emanuel Sharp continues to light up. Emanuel Sharp, for what it's worth, folks, is playing his way into pro conversations. Terrence Arsenault, I think, could also be a pro. Jamal Shead get a shot somewhere. He's just a very much like a solid college point guard that does a lot of things that college teams value. The pro teams are still like, but can you shoot it, right? Emanuel Sharp is turning into a pro, and right before our eyes had 15 points. And frankly, what I would have described the first half of that game being a struggle. His overall shooting numbers are not great. 6 of 13, 1 of 4 from 3. His 3 was crucial down the stretch. I feel like it's interesting to look at Emanuel Sharp's game because he has the quick trigger release. He has broad shoulders. He's in so much better shape this year physically than he was last year, and props him and Coach Bishop and the crew for that. I mean, that's hard work. That is not easy to do. And I was really, really impressed by him throughout. In the Utah game, I have other things I want to say. I want to say, first of all, thank you to Utah for zoning us. I don't know why teams would ever look at Houston and zone them, especially when you're so much bigger. I get that it's tough to guard Houston on the perimeter, but I'd run a pack line or something. I would not. Maybe I shouldn't say it out loud. Other teams don't do it. I don't want to. I don't. I don't know why he'd play zone. You're just giving up threes. Houston's got a ton of guards, ton of shooters. They'll find someone hot, right? They'll find someone hot. On the game, Houston did just shoot 33% from three. But again, they were searching for who that hot person was. It was not Damian Dunn. He missed his only attempt. Anyway, I just don't know why they ran zone. I thank them for running zone. I don't think you'll see zone from Dayton on Sunday. Now, Dayton comes in as a top-ranked mid-major team of sorts. They are ranked 58th in KenPom right now in the Atlantic 10 Conference. They're currently the highest ranked in the Atlantic 10 Conference on KenPom. KenPom is interesting in how they rank teams because it kind of alters throughout the year. But the A10, they've got Dayton, St. Bonnie's, George Mason, Loyola Chicago, Davidson, GW. They've got teams you've heard of from the tournament, that's what I'm getting at, right? They've got teams you heard of from the tournament, and typically one of them is pretty good. This year, that team appears to be Dayton, and that's who Houston has a date with. Yeah, like transition there on Sunday night. Dayton is interesting to watch because they're very high in how many three-pointers they attempt per game. They shoot a large percentage of their shots from behind the arc. They run at a relatively slow pace to the nation, but actually a faster pace than Utah or Towson or Stetson have. So, like, it'll feel a little faster maybe, but that's actually just because of how slow the previous couple games were in terms of possessions per game and how much of the shot clock they're using per possessions. They have a fairly average size team. They're not tall like Utah or what have you. Deron Holmes, we're getting a long roundabout way. Deron Holmes is the guy to keep your eye on. He's the 6'10 junior forward. He is all A10 tournament, all A10 defense. He is all A10 freshman. It's a freshman. He is really, really talented. He's a junior. He is 6'10". He is shooting the ball from behind the arc well this year. He's averaging, what's this number here? 33% on 3 attempts per game. So he's making a 3 every game. I will say, in the limited sample size that is the 4 games so far this season for them, that's a good improvement. He has not typically been that guy in his career, so I don't know if that's a 6'10 guy trying to add that to his game to go pro. I don't know if that's an anomaly because of the season he's had, but Houston should probably look to cover him behind the arc. He's their leading point man, though. He's getting 16 points per game this season, had 18 points per game for them last season. He'll probably be in contention for the A10 MVP across the board. Other guys to keep an eye on, their point guard, Javon Bennett, 5'10", 155, smaller guy. Houston's actually going to be bigger at point guard for a change, but he's a lightning bug. He's super, super fast. He can shoot the ball all right, but he's really more of a distributor, really more of a pick and roll guy, finding homes, pick and roll, kicking it out. They got other guys to do the shooting when they need it. One of those guys is Kobe Brea, B-R-E-A. He's shooting the ball pretty well from behind the arc. On the season, he's actually shooting 45%. Again, I think that's mostly small sample size, but he's a shooter. So they run these different pick and roll types of actions in a bunch of different spots on the floor. They like the slot, but they run a bunch of different spots on the floor and run pick and roll actions, kick the ball out from there. I think Houston will be okay because they're going to monster trap off the screen, rotate over and help the helper, and cut off the roller man, and make the difficult but open pass all the way across court into the lob pass, much like we saw against Utah from half court into the baseline down by the basket. It'll be like a diagonal pass across the corner. It's a crazy difficult pass that I think Houston's going to force. And frankly, when the ball's in the air that long, we know they go and get it. I think Houston wins this game by around 10 again. It'll be competitively at like 7, 8, and then free throws. If we can make our darn free throws, we should be in at around 10, if I'm making predictions here. And then Houston will probably move up in the rankings again on Monday into that 5 spot with an impressive defensive performance because they've played so many basketball games this week, and they typically reward people for those kinds of things. Now, if you're talking about rewarding for things or moving into winning on things, and you're feeling like winning your own kinds of things, then you need to make sure you go to prizepicks.com and win something today. PrizePicks is doing all kinds of daily fantasy sports things. You can pick stats and go over under. You can even combine sports while there's that this equinox for football and basketball and stuff are happening at once. You can say, I think Travis Kelce is going to have Travis Kelce and LeBron James plus minus 10.5 receptions and threes made. So Travis Kelce gets 7 receptions. LeBron James gets 4 threes. Boom. That's your 11. LeBron James is shooting well from 3 this year. It's not a bad take there. They also have this great reboot policy for if you have a guy injured, they can get rebooted if they don't come back in the second. If they get injured in the first half and they don't come back in the second half, you can get that money back. All kinds of cool things happening on PrizePicks. Go to prizepicks.com/lockedoncollege. Use code lockedoncollege for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, that's lockedoncollege is the promo code at prizepicks.com/lockedoncollege. And you put in $100, they'll match it with their own 100. PrizePicks, go win today. All right. Last but not least, I do, because Houston is relevant nationally, want to point out a couple things. One, Houston is atop the KenPom. KenPom is a series of mathematical analytical equations done by one Ken Pomeroy, and he has Houston at the top of the country, number 1 ranked in KenPom, followed by Purdue, Kansas, UConn, and Alabama. You'll notice one of those teams is in our conference this year. The third Big 12 team is Baylor, so whatever that's worth. You got Baylor following up at 9 overall. All of those teams are undefeated on the season so far. And if you look around college basketball, look at what's happening in college basketball, I think it's really interesting that we're like getting Houston's tournament underway now, because truthfully, a lot of these major tournaments are happening in the coming week. You'll see different people out in Hawaii playing, coaches in Aloha shirts and that kind of stuff. And people are asking like, well, what do I need to pay attention to for the Cougs? And if you can't tell from the way I talk about football, it was a little different in the American Athletic Conference because admittedly, Houston was at the cream of the crop in that, and they were not worried about missing the tournament the last couple of years if they didn't win the conference outright, obviously. But in the Big 12, I don't think there's any worry about missing the tournament to say, but I do look around the conference kind of seeing where things will shake up. And so like starting on Sunday, you've got a handful of Big 12 teams in different, Kansas State's playing the Bahamas Championship, Texas in the Empire Classic. Obviously, you got Houston and Charleston, but you got like Cincinnati playing Northern Kentucky. That same Northern Kentucky team that gave us so much trouble to start the NCAA tournament last year is playing Cincinnati, right? You can go to later this week. West Virginia is playing in the Fort Myers tip-off. I think they're playing SMU, actually, in the Fort Myers tip-off. Maui Invitational tips off. You got Kansas in that. Kansas in a loaded field at the Maui Invitational. All kinds of fun things happening this week. And so what I'm doing is watching how Kansas matches up in the Maui Invitational, because it's a loaded field. And I think of Houston as being one of the best teams in the country. And I think of Kansas being one of the best teams in the country. And they see teams like Gonzaga. Let me pull this up to be sure. They got Gonzaga, they got Creighton, they got UCLA, Tennessee, Purdue, Syracuse, like big name teams in that one, right? And so if you think like, well, how's Kansas going to match up with Houston? I've got eyes on that one this week to make sure I pay attention. Same kind of thing with Xavier, same kind of thing with Baylor, same kind of thing across the board in the Big 12. I'm looking at where they're playing their big games, because Houston, after playing on Sunday, is actually off for several days. I think getting their tournament play out of the way on the early side of it, and then not coming back again until Friday. Friday sounds right. They got Montana, and I don't think it's on Thanksgiving Day, so I think it's Friday. Montana is coming to us. It's nice to have a game at home after playing a few in Charleston, South Carolina. So if you're in Houston for Thanksgiving, got family coming to town, etc., go check out this one. It'll be, I think it's an afternoon game. ESPN says it's at 3 o'clock. 3 o'clock. That's a fun one for sure, but that's the only game for Houston this upcoming week. So after they win Sunday night, it's a nice long week of recovery, to say the least. And that's, I think, why my eyes are elsewhere across the conference, across the country. The nice thing about being the Big 12 is across the conference is kind of across the country, right? It's got all over, all kinds of things everywhere. It does look like, and speaking about the Big 12, as we're recording this, I think Texas did pull off the win at Iowa State. So there's that. Still not a sexy win for them in a while. All right. So I want to wrap up by talking about some people asked me. Well, first of all, I wanted to point out that today's episode is like this long, crazy, lengthy one. It'll be split up on Sunday and put into different news feeds across the board. If you want a more basketball specific, and only listen to the basketball half, or football specific, and only listen to the football half. If you think some of this is sounding somewhat repetitive, I'm sorry. If you listen to the two episodes separately, that's the case. People asked me on Saturday, and I want to wrap up by talking about this. Okay. People asked me on Saturday, Parker, you're tweeting a lot about Kansas today. And Kansas was very front of mind. Kansas was very front of mind. I don't know if you guys have clicked on the show. I was, born in Houston, and I went to middle school and high school in Austin. And I had a teacher there who passed away on Friday, and her name was Coach Adams. Coach Adams was a PE teacher, a girls basketball coach. Would eventually become a director of equity and inclusion, and work her way up to administration. And she had two different long bouts of cancer for ultimately passing away on Friday. Her son is one, KJ Adams. KJ Adams plays for Kansas. If you've not heard KJ Adams' name before. And so I say to say that while Coach Adams, who was, I'm a teacher and coach, I reflect a lot on teachers and coaches that meant a lot to me. And Coach Adams was a very friendly, welcome face to myself and many people on our campus. Once upon a time, I met KJ when I was a little kid. And so I think the story did catch a little bit of legs. And so I was tweeting a lot about Kansas because it was catching legs Saturday morning. And people were like, Parker's tweeting a lot about Kansas. That's weird. And so I wanted to point out why, because Coach Adams was an amazing teacher, an amazing, I talked to other teachers now and then in this industry, colleague. She was an amazing coach, state championship winning coach. She was an amazing mom to Brittany, KJ, and Jayla. Her husband, Kevin, would say the same thing about her being a wife. Sister to her brother, Marcus. Coach Adams is really, really special. I could tell a couple different stories, but the one I think that sticks out in my head is I'm still feeling out of place in Austin, even though I've been there for a little bit at this point. I'm at a new private school. I've been to a public school for a couple years before, in sixth grade PE. And Coach Adams was like a record holder at Texas A&M as a basketball player. And we're playing some game where, like, you shoot from the elbow, you get 2 points. If you make it, you make a layup, you get a third point. How many can you and your partner get, and whatever? And I didn't have a teammate. I was kind of an odd man out. I was kind of a weirdo. And KJ and Coach Adams wanted to be on my team, and she's like went out of the way. And again, this is a record holder at Texas A&M. Wanted to be on my team, and so Coach stepped in, and she did, and and asked the coach, "Why are you on Parker's team? Why would you be on Parker's team? I'm the chunky weirdo. I liked basketball a lot, and I thought I was all right at it, but." Why do you want to be on Parker's team? Why is Coach on Parker's team? She's like, someone's got to be on his team, and it's me. I'm going to be on Parker's team. And I don't know that she ever really knew what that meant to sixth grade Parker, but it meant a lot. And she was a dorm parent. She was a dorm parent to kids at half boarding school. So she was a little second mom to a lot of people on campus. She was a great mom to people that she was the mom to. And she was briefly a fantastic grandmother as well, while she got to enjoy that part of her life while she was here. Coach Adams, I miss you a lot. It was hard to see that Friday night when I got home at like 11. I think that ultimately led to me staying up and watching a lot of basketball, because that's something that I guess I tie close to the people that were important to me. So if you saw me tweeting a lot about Kansas, that's why. And I'm sorry, I'm getting emotional talking about it at the end. But Coach Adams is really, really special. And her son, KJ, is a tremendous basketball player at Kansas. And so if you see me talking about KJ in Kansas, that's why. And I hope that makes some more sense. With that said, we're going to wrap that one up tonight. Tonight's episode of Locked On Cougs. Cougars After Dark covered the highs of the basketball season, the lows of the football season, and the lower lows that exist sometimes. Thank you all so much for tuning in today. Locked on Cougs is a daily show each and every day. We appreciate you tuning in and making sure first or on Cougars After Dark episode's last listen of the day. Make sure to go check out Locked on Big 12. Drake's doing a great job with breaking down the whole conference. Locked on Cougs, Prime Locked on Podcast Network. That means your team every day. Go Cougs. Miss you, Coach.